A polygamist, a former slave who had purchased his freedom with money won in a lottery, a man described by his acquaintances as mean and intolerant of human frailty, Jean-Jacques Vesey seemed an unlikely candidate to unite slaves and free black people in the fight for their liberty. As the property of a slave ship's captain, Joseph Vesey, for nearly half his life, Jean-Jacques was well acquainted with the harsh realities of the traffic in flesh.
I think that his own experiences, being born a slave in St. Thomas, living briefly before the Revolution in Saint-Domingue as a slave, being forced by Captain Vesey to go down to the docks and even bring ashore slaves who were being imported into South Carolina and get them to the slave pens in Charleston, reminded him that this was not a world of brotherhood.
In 1816, Jean-Jacques Vesey and other black Methodists in Charleston elected to separate from the white church. By 1820, there were some 3,000 members of the city's African church, accounting for nearly a third of the members of the AME denomination nationwide.
The church was opening this horizon. People were experiencing this conversion so that all of a sudden they see themselves as a part of this larger world, this larger God, this cosmos, where they have rights.
When white authorities shut down Charleston's African church, church members decided it was time to orchestrate a plan to free the slaves of Charleston. They were led by Jean-Jacques Vesey. Vesey called a meeting to organize the strike, excluding, he said, slaves who accepted presents of old coats from their masters, and the pastor in charge of the African church.
I one night met at Vesey's a great number of men. Vesey said the Negroes were living such an abominable life, they ought to rise. I said I was living well. He said though I was, others was not, and that it was such fools as I that were in their way. Frank.
The number of conspirators in Vesey's plot was estimated to be in the thousands, making it the most far-reaching insurrection planned in North America.
Jean-Jacques Vesey's plot against Charleston, South Carolina, was one of the most significant of the attempts to strike against slavery by American slaves. It was probably the most elaborately planned of the conspiracies that we know about. And it's interesting in several regards. One of the ways in which it's interesting is that it appeals to both biblical Christianity and to African conjure.
Unlike Gabriel 20 years before, Vesey planned to spare few whites. But like Gabriel, his insurrection ended before it began. Vesey was informed on by one of his men and captured and sentenced to die. In the aftermath of the Vesey conspiracy, white citizens of Charleston tore down the African church, brick by brick.
It was important to raise the church. It shows the importance of these black institutions for a sense of black independence and autonomy. It's the same reason that black churches are bombed or burned today. It represents a sense of crucial autonomy for black people, and an autonomy which in Charleston had turned dangerous.
In one Friday, late in July of 1822, the state executed in one moment 22 of Vesey's followers. Instead of using the regular gallows, they simply tossed ropes over an old wall known as the Lines that was built in the northern part of Charleston.
the 22 were all slaves. A crude platform was built for them to stand on, but the platform was so low to the ground that when the slaves fell, their necks didn't break, and they were slowly strangling to death. To hasten them to the grave, the captain of the guard rode down the line, shooting each of them in the head, reloading as he went from one man to the next.